We live.
All right, welcome to Celebrate Recovery. I'm going to go ahead and pray us in. So, Lord, I just thank you for this opportunity that we get every Thursday night. Lord, I thank you for Jason's heart, Lord. I thank you that you gave him a gift to praise you, Lord, that we get to praise with him tonight, Lord. I want to say a prayer for Justin tonight as he gives his testimony. And I definitely want to put a hedge of protection around people that are struggling right now, Lord, that you would just put a spirit of peace in their heart, Lord, and that they would know that fear is not of you, Lord, that you just give us peace and love and harmony, Lord, and I ask that your presence be known tonight, Lord, as people are watching, as we start to worship tonight and we hear a great testimony tonight, Lord, that you just, your spirit moves through Grants Pass tonight and the people that are watching this, Lord. But I just thank you in advance for the things that come out of Celebrate Recovery, Lord. I thank you for the gifts. I thank you for the hearts that are touched. And Lord, I just ask that whoever's struggling tonight, Lord, that somehow they just run across this live video stream. I just thank you for everything that you do in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol.
Yep.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're watching. And I hope you're singing along loud enough to cover all the mistakes like I say usually. It's going to be beautiful. So we're just going to worship. We'll get it. This is the part of being live, right? I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I know you as a father. I know you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. so, so good. Every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. Yeah, that's a good start. That's a good start.
Yes.
Love you all. You're all with me in spirit. It's so awesome.
This place is packed.
Justin, it's kind of nice to have more than just you and me. I mean, I love you, brother, but we got 5 people here, spaced roughly 15 feet apart from each other, and it's pretty awesome. So they're going to sing with me. You are love, you bring light Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord. Awesome. Okay, bear with me one moment. I'm going to tune really quick and get a drink of water. But I hope we're enjoying this, and this just gives Justin more time because we're honored to hear his testimony tonight. That's pretty amazing, and I'm super excited to hear it. But hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all staying quarantined and practicing social distancing. It's getting old, am I right? It's getting old.
It is.
I was just telling you this group of 5 people that are spaced properly apart. I was just telling them that. I won't tell you exactly what I told them, but I was telling them I miss them. I miss them. I miss my peeps. But it's always nice to come here and worship with you guys. So, all right, let's move on.
got one more. This one's actually in honor of Justin. So, disclaimer: I'm not taking requests. I'm limited on my song choices here, but Justin did put in a request, and we're gonna go ahead and make this one happen. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good. Good.
All right, there's only a couple of you here, so I'll let that slide. I'm only a little bit nervous right now.
You got this.
I mean, I got it in my hand. I don't know.
You're doing great.
Yeah, that's what I'd say too. All right, thanks everybody for watching. I'm Justin, a grateful believer. So, start from the beginning. I was born in 1981. My mother had me when she was 20 years old. She had a kind of rough life. She was raised in her grandparents' house in Lakewood, California with her mom, a few sets of aunts and uncles, and her cousins. Her grandparents were by-the-book Catholics. Unfortunately, everyone else were heroin addicts and alcoholics. Nothing was sacred for my mom, and she was abused physically, mentally, and sexually. Everyone would steal her things and sell them for drugs. She wore clothing that was handmade by her grandma. She didn't mind because she knew that they didn't have much money, and she could make nice stuff. She got a job at the earliest age possible. At the age 15, she wrote her father a letter letting him know that she was not happy with the way his life was, being he was a full-blown addict, in and out of mental institutions and jails. He then decided to kill himself, which my mom would forever blame herself for. She went on to graduate high school while working and supporting herself the best she could. She met my dad around this time, and he was also a partier who used and sold drugs. Sometime after I was born, he got busted and was looking at going to prison. Around the same time, she started to find out that he was a womanizer and had been cheating on her and decided to part ways. Over the course of the next quite a while, he would spend 26 of it in and out of prison. I've had minimal contact with him through letters and a few visits in and out of prison. In the last 5 to 10 years, I've spent more time with him than I ever did in my life. I found that in a lot of areas we are alike. I love him, and by no means do I blame him for lost time. My mother then got with another guy who turned out to be a not very good guy. He would beat her and lock me in rooms as well as some other abuse. One thing I do remember about this man is he had a parrot that was mean just like him. He would cuss and bite. She knew she had to get away from there, so she was on the street with me as a toddler. She was delivering parts for a radio shop when they let her stay there. You see, this radio shop was chaos. So many people lived there, and everyone was on drugs and partying. From what I understand, the guy that owned it started coming on to my mom, and she was very uncomfortable. This is where she met my stepdad. Quick break. Who I would grow to know as my dad. He let her stay in his room in the back of the shop with no pressure, and soon they fell in love. I also learned to love him as my dad. I grew up very fast there. There were so many people that were not shy about teaching me how things worked on the streets, and I was very eager to take it all in. While other kids were learning about their ABCs, I was learning about the different drugs and how people did them, how they got them with or without money. I was very observant. My mom told my dad that she wanted to move, so we moved right next door where people could run across our roof and through our yard whenever the cops came. When I was 3, my mom suddenly went blind and they couldn't figure out how. My dad had a good job at a satellite company and he also sold speed. My mother also drank quite a bit, so much that if she didn't drink, she would go into grand mal seizures. She was about as full-blown as an alcoholic as they get. My parents now start to fight and argue quite a bit. Sometimes it would get physical. But regardless, I was always pretty happy. I was never the kid to believe in what I couldn't see. I never believed in Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, or the Easter Bunny. My mom told me about God and Jesus a few times, and I think to me it just fit in with the other fairy tales. Every summer, my stepsister and brother would come stay with us. She was 8 years older than me, and he was 13 years older. I always thought they were the coolest people ever. On my 5th birthday, me and my sister were at the liquor store playing video games when I was watching this older guy play an arcade game, Commando, when he called me a few choice names, so my sister took him outside and beat him up. Not until she was done playing Miss Pac-Man, though. She was very tough and they were the same age. The next day, he came to my house and apologized. From that day on, he would always come and pick me up. He was my first real friend. He was always up to no good, and we would steal from the mall. I would grab stuff and they would run out while I would run behind them. I would follow him everywhere he went. Him and his brother would beat people up and nobody could really mess with me. It was also around this time that I first used speed. I watched everyone do it and they left it around, so I just did it like them. Around the same time, one of those. Around the same time, my sister started sexually molesting me. I didn't know there was anything wrong with this. I thought, like everything else, it was what happened. So everyone, it was what happened to everyone. This went on until I was almost 10. I once told a friend about it right in front of her, and as soon as I said it, I could tell by her reaction that I could never tell anyone again. She said I was making it up and later told me that I could never tell anyone about it. Through the ages of 6 and 7, I started experimenting sexually with other girls my age. The older kids that I was in with thought it was cool, and that just made me that much cooler in their eyes. My mom caught me once and slapped me so hard that I had to go to school with a handprint on my face. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, so when my teacher asked me, I just simply said that my mom slapped me. They called the police and had my mom come to the school. My mom was so mad that day she ran home in front of me screaming. She then told me that I was never to tell anyone about what went on in our home. I quickly learned the code of silence. About this age, I first watched a pornographic movie with my friends. I would start fighting at school as well as away from school, and my parents would see patterns in me that couldn't be good. The physical violence with my parents continued, and I couldn't say whose fault it was. I just know that it wasn't healthy. I started forming a nervousness about it when they would fight at home and they would fight on vacation. It really didn't matter. One day I remember a kid older than I was borrowed a game from me and wouldn't give it back. My friend and I went to his house. My friend had a handgun and I had a pistol, BB gun. We knocked on the door and his mom answered and she asked why we were there with guns. I told her that her son had my video game and that I wanted it back. She shut the door and returned with the game immediately. I was rewarded for negative behavior that day, and it continued. One morning, I woke up to fighting, and it was worse this time. All I could see from my room was my mom running at my dad back and forth. By the end, my mom had blood on her and looked like a wreck. I just remembered being so scared we were walking around Long Beach, her in her robe and me in my underwear. I took her to my friend's house who lived in the projects known as Carmelitas. We called my grandma and my dad went to jail. When he came home, my aunt came and got me and stayed with her for a few. I stayed with her for a few weeks. One day, me and my cousin came home from the park and we walked in on her being assaulted. It was pretty devastating. I ended up going home and things were actually better, other than the fact that my mom was still an alcoholic and my dad was still on drugs. One day when my dad came home, there was a few guys waiting for him. They were mad because of him and my mom fighting, and I watched them knock his teeth out. It was pretty scary. I remember just let me get a drink real quick. I remember just wanting to be able to help him, but I couldn't. Now, I was still probably only like 7 or 8 at the time. It didn't take long before my parents decided that they didn't want to live in Long Beach anymore. They had some friends that already moved to Grants Pass, so we moved up here. I was still only 8. We lived in a little trailer on our friend's property at this point. From all the violence, I was very gun shy and always expected the worst to happen. Even if something happened on accident, I thought that my parents were fighting. I remember one time my mom jumped up on my dad to give him a hug and an X-Acto knife in his pocket stabbed her. I thought he had done it on purpose. I believe at this early age, I already had PTSD. It didn't take long for us to get our own home. My dad's an electronics tech, and he could always get a job. He took the best care of us he could, and I can never really remember going without anything. Around the same time, I caught my sister stealing weed from my parents, and she didn't want to get caught, so she took me out and got me high. I liked it, and from that day on, I knew how to support my habit. One day, my landlord ran over my dog, who I'd had since I was 2. I was absolutely heartbroken. This is the first experience with death I would have, and it was not easy for me. Weird as it may sound, this was grief that I had no tools to deal with. It was right around this time that my younger sister was born. I always loved her so much and still do. My mom started learning how to cook, and we started eating dinner as a family. Her cooking wasn't the best at the time, but it did get better. From here, I started doing just about whatever I wanted. I was smoking cigarettes, drinking, smoking weed, taking acid, mushrooms, going to barter fairs, and making some real close friends. I was probably about 11, 12 years old. A lot of the times I had very little, if any, supervision. If I couldn't get any drugs, I would huff gasoline. One night, my best friend's brothers would both die in a car wreck. Shortly after that, I burned my house down to the ground. It was an accident, but I felt an extreme amount of guilt. I would be forced to switch schools and be separated from my friends. At this time, I started using meth every day. I would sneak out of the house at 10 p.m., get high all night with the neighbors, and sneak back in the morning. I was 14 years old and completely strung out. I wouldn't eat for days. At this point, I started learning about selling dope to keep my habit rolling. I got busted at school, got in trouble at home, and ran away. I ended up moving to Wolf Creek with my brother, who was a so-called functioning meth addict, if there is such a thing. He had a full-time job, and I had rules. I had chores, and I had to go to school. The only problem is I was allowed to do drugs. Late at night, my brother and I got a call with once again something that I didn't know how to deal with. My older sister had died without warning from a brain aneurysm. One day, my dad showed up and told me that my mom tried to quit drinking and went into a seizure when she was alone at the house with my little sister. She was admitted into Genesis recovery program, and he needed my help taking care of my sister. I was 15 and she was 5. My mom ended up getting out and staying sober. She got hooked up with Coalition for the Blind, learned how to read Braille, volunteered her time with the Women's Crisis Center. She then got into college at RCC. Is it too early to stop, or do I gotta keep going?
A little bit more.
A little bit more? Almost there?
Yeah.
All right. She then got into college at RCC. We got a house and she was doing great. Only problem is that I didn't feel like I belonged in this perfect little family. I was still in an active addiction, and I wasn't looking to stop for anyone. I went from couch to couch. I ran away more than I was home. My mom was doing great, and now I realized all she really wanted at the time was to have her son home. I continued to go to school and work odd jobs. I ended up graduating. I moved to Colorado where I could continue my meth addiction and occasionally smoke crack cocaine. I ended up coming home to my mom in Oregon. No matter what happened between us, we were always extremely close. She was my best friend. I ended up getting a job fighting fire, which I loved. Not only was it fun, it gave me lots of money to party with, and that's what I did. One day I fractured my neck, and my arms went paralyzed. I lost all movement. I luckily had some really good friends that would help me take care of myself. After 6 to 9 months, I started getting mobility back, but still had no strength. I would do my own physical therapy because I had no insurance. I could get some strength back and was able to go back to work one day. One day my best friend would call me and tell me that his mom had passed away, which was somebody who had a strong influence in my life. Once again, I didn't know what to do, but as they say, life goes on. Throughout the next few years, I would work odd jobs, fought fire in several states across the United States, and do some emergency relief in Texas and Louisiana. The man I fought fire for had a past that involved some sort of criminal behavior, but had since found the Lord. He would always have his Bible and spoke the word. It didn't mean much to me at the time, but would later in my life sink in. I also started picking mushrooms with a friend of mine who was still more like a brother. We lived in a tent in Brookings, up in the wilderness, and we hitchhiked weekly back and forth between Grants Pass and Brookings. I ended up going down to California and helping my aunt move up here. I told her my mom was in recovery and that she no longer drank. That didn't seem to mean much to her. She came up and had no problem in helping my mom drink one or two here and there, which frequently became more and more. One night, while I was working at Taco Bell, I got a phone call from my dad saying that my mom was in the hospital and that she probably wasn't going to make it. Her liver had failed and she had slipped into a coma. This was in December. She had total brain damage, and on the day after Christmas we had to decide to pull the plug, which was not what I understood it to be. It was actually 2 weeks of anguish as I watched my mother's body hold on to life. All I could say was why. I do believe that part of me died that day. Out of all the things I've ever suffered, this is by far the largest, and I once again had something I would not be able to deal with. I cried. In fact, that it was all I could do. I abandoned everything except for meth. This for me was the ultimate stuffing tool, and temporarily it worked. As long as I kept myself high over the course of the next 3 years, my life would spiral out of control. I would allow the devil to lead my path completely around this time. So it was this time that another good friend of mine actually accidentally shot himself, and another purposely shot himself. I couldn't get myself to go to work, being I had no willpower to do anything except for slowly destroy myself. So I was fired and kicked out of my house. At this time, a very good friend of mine, who I had known since I was 11, came back into my life, and we started spending a lot of time together. He wasn't the best of influence either. We were always high and into some sort of criminal activities. Most of this is better left unsaid. Some I felt was justified, and other things I even knew was wrong. By the grace of God, I didn't end up dead or in prison at this time. At some point, I decided I needed to step away, and I really wish I could have gotten him to step away as well, because shortly after I did, he would get into a high-speed shootout with the cops that would land him in prison for more than 24 years. Another prime example of a good person who made one too many bad choices and will have to pay for it for way longer than expected. I wanted a better life, but was unsure how to get it. I tried to go to school, but I was too strung out. So I just kept getting high and selling meth in order to support my habit. I moved back into my dad's house. He was still getting high, and he had also gone downhill after my mom passed away. While my sister moved in with my aunt because my dad's house was far too unstable. Once again, I got another dreaded phone call. A good friend was on the other end to let me know that one of my best friends had just overdosed. What was even worse is the last time that I had seen him turned into a physical fight, and we weren't on speaking terms. One more thing for me to stuff. By this time, I was getting far too good at masking and hiding my emotions. It was okay because I still had meth. I remember standing on the scale one day at a whopping 123 pounds. It's like 65 pounds less than I am right now. The shame I felt that day was no match for my addiction. I just decided to stay away from the scale. My life was way too out of control, and I didn't know what to do. I can honestly say that I really didn't care whether I lived or died at this point. My life was just a big mess of what I considered partying, running and gunning, and doing what I knew I shouldn't be doing. I didn't quite match up. So around this time, I met my wife, but for the time being, we would just be friends, as we were both too wrapped up in our own destructive natures at the time. So I continued this until I would get busted for selling meth and go to jail. While I was in jail, I asked God to take my addiction away, and when I got out, the first thing I did was go get high, but it was suddenly different. It was the worst feeling I went home, I ate, and I went to bed, and I never got high again. That was 10/6/2007. My addiction was taken. Unfortunately, my love for money took over, and I started selling even more than before. It didn't take long before I was arrested again. This time, I would get sentenced to 35 months in prison. Jail was a cakewalk. Just another place to build more connections. I had a lot of people try and get me to go to church while I was in, but I was not going to be one of those guys that went to prison and hid behind religion. Besides that, I knew nothing about it, and frankly, it freaked me out. So I did what I always knew how to do. I made more connections and did things that I shouldn't have. After doing 13 months, I was accepted into the program that actually taught me a lot of very good life skills, but not what I really needed. Just a month before I got out, I was drawn by the Holy Spirit into church service. That's the only way I can explain it, because I wouldn't have gone on my own. As soon as I walked in, I heard it, those words that whoever believes in Jesus Christ shall not perish, but have everlasting life. It was at that moment I remember my mom telling me that as a kid, she believed in Christ and was baptized, and it dawned on me that she was not lost. Just waiting to meet me again in the kingdom of heaven. That's it. That's all I needed. I wanted this, and at that moment, I decided I wanted everyone to have it as well. I got out of prison, and when some of those connections that I found would call my dad's house because they knew I'd gotten out of prison, and I answered the phone, I told them that they had the wrong number and that Justin didn't live there anymore. There, I then became reacquainted with Carol, who I had mentioned before. I thought about her while I was locked up in prison quite frequently, and she was always on my mind. For some reason, I didn't know why, but I decided I needed to seek her out. And see, funny thing is we had both gotten clean at the exact same time. We were just in different places. I knew that every relationship I had ever had never worked out. So I wanted to take time with this one and be right by God. So we remained sexually abstinent until we got married. This was not easy, but it was worth it. And I know that this is what God wanted. And now, I've been married to the woman of my dreams for almost 9 great years. Now don't get me wrong, we've had good times and we've had bad. But with Christ at the center of our marriage, we have always found a way to work things out no matter what. We have a wonderful family of 3 kids who I love with all my heart. I started making positive relationships and decided I wanted to give back. I try and bring as many people to the Lord as I can, mostly through my positive example. Not going to say my life is perfect, but I'm happy. Mine and Carol's kids are all grown up now. And we've got 2 beautiful grandsons that I love with all my heart. I absolutely love my life. And that being said, I still have bad days, and I still have hard times. You might never know it when you look at somebody's life, and they always look happy, or they always look content, but everybody's always fighting a battle, and you never know what somebody else's battle looks like. I've had quite a few more friends die since I got out of prison. It's still so hard to deal with. Even thinking about it is painful at times. I still haven't quite gotten over my mom's death, but I don't use over it. I don't commit crime over it. I try not to be a jerk about stuff when things are really getting to me. I'm still not fixed, and I never will be. Because you see, as people, we're never going to be perfect. Our job is to keep growing, keep learning as people, and to try to become 1% better than you were yesterday. I think really the most important thing in life is to spread the love and to show people what it's like to live with Jesus in your heart. See, Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He also says in Matthew 28:19 and 20, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them how to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of that age. I believe it is our job as Christians to spread God's good word and to lead people in our wake to do the same. We are to see that peace of Christ inside of us. Walk with humility and integrity, treating people the way we would want to be treated, and trying to be as Christ-like as possible. We never know what anybody's day looks like or what anybody's going through, and you could always be that determining factor that makes somebody's day that much better or that much worse. So why not just be the better person? Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Whew. Thanks for listening. Okay.